Hello, everybody. It's Natasha Lester here with you tonight with Better Reading. Thank you to everyone at Better Reading for having me back. And hello to everyone who is joining us. I'll just chat for a couple of minutes because I know it takes a couple of minutes for everyone to start joining the feed. But I'd just tell you a little bit about what I've been doing over the last month, which is basically being busy with the publication of The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard. I went on a tour of almost everywhere in Australia, probably the biggest tour I've ever done, which was super fun. So I met you on tour. Hello, it's lovely to see you again here tonight. And then when I got home, I had 9 days to write and finish my next manuscript and send that to my publisher. So it has been a very big month. And there are some people joining us. Hello, Wendy. Lovely to see you. And hi, Jessica. How are you? So I am here tonight to talk about The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard. Oh, let's put it over that side. I always get my right and my left wrong on these screens when you're mirrored. So bear with me on that. So I'm just going to chat to you a little bit about the book. But as always, please leave me any questions that you might have in the comments. I would love to answer anything that you particularly want to know about the book or about me as a writer or anything in general. I get asked all kinds of questions, and so I'm happy to answer pretty much anything. Hi, Sharon. Hi, Nicole. And hello, Carolyn. How are you all? It's so lovely to have you here. And Anne Lee, hello, how are you? A few familiar faces in the comments there, which is always nice to see. So in a nutshell, The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard is about a young woman named Astrid who comes to Manhattan in 1970. She's the daughter of Christian Dior's infamous muse, Mitza Bricard, and Astrid has an ambition to become a famous fashion designer, not a muse like her mother. She does find fame very quickly in Manhattan, but just not for the things she'd hoped to become famous for, until she's asked to be one of the designers showing at the famous fashion battle of Versailles that took place in 1973. And just as Astrid is on the cusp of appearing to get everything she ever wanted, she vanishes, leaving behind only a bloodied white silk dress. And the question, what happened to Astrid Bricard? And of course, I'm not going to give you the answer to that question tonight. You will have to read the book to find out. But I will talk to you about a few of the other elements of the book that I mentioned there. And I will also say hello to a few more lovely people who've joined me. Again, a few more familiar faces and names, which is great. Hi, Melissa. Hi, Tracy. Hello, Christine. And hi, Julia. Lovely to have you all here. So as you might have gathered from that quick summary of the book, it's got 3 different timelines happening. We've got a timeline that goes from 1917 through to 1947, with Mitza Bricard, who was a real-life woman, real-life, supposedly Christian Dior's muse, as the character in that part of the book. Then we have Astrid's story in the 1970s, which was super fun to write. And then we have a present-day storyline as well. So essentially, I'm covering nearly 100 years and 3 characters, which was probably the most challenging book I've ever written. I don't think I'll ever do that again. It just about killed me. So I'll just talk very quickly about the present day storyline before I move back into those historical storylines, and just quickly stop again to say hello to some more people who've joined us. Hi, Jill, and hi, Rita, and hi, Rachel. Barbara's on page 412. So yes, you are almost there, Barbara. I won't do any spoilers tonight to ruin the book for you and ruin the ending. I hope you enjoy the rest of it too. Thank you, Heather, for saying that you enjoyed it. And you finished it today. Perfect timing for this then. So as I mentioned, there's a present day storyline, and that was actually inspired by real life, something that actually happened to me. I very rarely draw on my own life in my books. I tend to think I've got a pretty boring life and it's not really the dramatic stuff of fiction. But this time, my father-in-law, I always say that my father-in-law is a man who likes a grand gesture. And whenever he has a big birthday, he takes his whole large family away on a holiday to celebrate. And at the end of 2018, he was turning 80. And he decided that it would be a great idea to hire a French chateau for 29 people to spend a week in to celebrate his birthday. And of course, the minute he mentioned French chateau, I put my hand up and said, yes, please, I will be there. So off we went to France in December 2018 to stay at this beautiful French chateau. And it was December, so it was winter. It was very cold. It was -5 degrees outside. We're all dressed in our coats, scarves, beanies, gloves, you name it. And we approached the chateau, walked in the doors, expecting the blast of central heating to hit us and warm us up. And all that hit us was more cold air, colder, in fact, than it was outside. It was like the Arctic in there. So that was pretty much how the week progressed. We joked, and actually it wasn't a joke, we're sure this is actually what happened, that the chateau owners had been sitting in the window waiting for the bus to drive up, and the minute they saw the bus, only then did they go and turn the central heating on. And if you know anything about French chateaus, they're pretty cold, drafty places. So it took the whole week for the chateau to warm up and for us to actually start to remove our coats, scarves, beanies, gloves, etc. from our bodies. We basically wore the same things outside as we did inside. So it was pretty funny. And I just thought, oh my goodness, this would make such a fun setting for a book, particularly because the chateau's owner walked around in these massive shaggy fur boots and this shaggy fur coat. We nicknamed her the Yeti because that's exactly what she looked like. So you will meet the Yeti in The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard because she was too good not to have in the storyline. But because I'm a novelist, we like to make things particularly difficult for our characters. So I thought, okay, what could make this scenario even kind of worse than being bitterly cold in this supposedly luxurious French chateau? So I thought, okay, well, what if it wasn't a family reunion? What if the main character was coming to join her ex-husband and her whole extended ex-family-in-law for 3 weeks in a freezing cold French chateau? So that is a situation that Blythe Bricard finds herself in the contemporary part of the storyline. I hope you enjoy reading about that. It's kind of funny and dramatic and a mix of all of those fun, fashionable French things that I like to do in all of my books. So welcome to all the rest of the people that have just joined while I have been talking. I can see, oh, thanks, Melissa, for saying that your mum loves my books. Hello to Melissa's mum as well. Thank you for reading them. And to Barbara for saying that you're loving the book. And Yvonne's got the book waiting on the table. Well, I hope you enjoy it too when you have the chance to read it. I can see that I've got a couple of questions there, so I'll just stop talking to answer those questions. Sharon, thank you for your question. Sharon has asked, which timeline did I enjoy writing the most? That is such a hard question. I think it's the 1970s storyline. That was really new for me. Normally with my books, I begin writing the historical timelines first. So whilst the books might be structured where they're interweaving between the past and the present, I don't write them like that. I write each individual time period by itself. So, normally I start off writing the historical storylines first because my books are largely historical fiction and the history is what really grounds the story. But for this one, I did it a little bit in reverse. Because the 1970s was a new time period for me to write about, I didn't feel comfortable diving straight into that. And I was still doing quite a lot of research on Myths of Bricard, the real life woman who grounds the 1917 to 1947 storyline. So I didn't feel ready to start that either. But because the present day storyline was something I was kind of drawing from personal experience on, I felt super comfortable writing that. So I began there in the present, which, like I say, is really unusual for me. But then when I got to the 1970s, when I felt like I'd read enough about the 70s to be able to kind of bring 1970s Manhattan to life, I dove straight into it. I loaded up a playlist for myself of all the great 1970s songs. So Rolling Stones, Joni Mitchell, a bit of Fleetwood Mac, Diana Ross, all of those amazing bands and singers. And with the music pumping in the room, I began to write the 1970s. And the other thing I really loved about writing the 1970s storyline was diving deeply into 1970s fashion. 1970s fashion is wildly misunderstood. Everybody thinks ABBA, and that is the very late part of the 1970s. But my book covers 1970 to 73. So you've got these really beautiful 1930s inspired gowns, a lot of Halston around then, and they're just gorgeous. And so researching the actual dresses from the time period and pulling those into my story was just gorgeous. I loved writing that part of the book too. So there is actually a playlist available for the book. If you're on Spotify, you can go to Spotify and just search The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard, and you'll be able to find that playlist. And a lot of readers have said that they have had the playlist going as they've been reading the book, and that it's really enhanced their reading experience. So I totally recommend that you do that if you have the chance to do that. So a couple more comments there. Lana's just read What Is Left Over After, which is actually my very first book that was published back in 2010, and it was republished and rejacketed earlier this year. And so Lana said it was such a moving story. Thank you so much for saying that, Lana, because it's my first book. I feel it's a very special book for me, but I always feel slightly anxious about it because it was my first, and I still do have so much to learn. So it's lovely to hear that it was moving, even though it was my kind of apprenticeship as a writer, which I guess I'm still going through. I don't think you ever fully qualify as a writer by any means. Now, Tracy, hello, Tracy. You've asked a question there about was the silver dress and the photo real? So just for some context for everybody else who is here listening, part of the book centers around this iconic silver dress that Astrid wears to a nightclub called the Cheetah, which was a real Manhattan nightclub in the early 1970s. She and Hawk make this dress together. Hawk is another character. His name is Hawk Jones. He's also a fashion designer. They make the dress together in this kind of burst of inspiration at college one day. And then Astrid wears this dress out. It's startlingly short. It's silver lame. It's got a scooped out back and long sleeves. It's pretty sexy and pretty spectacular. And she and Hawk kind of end up dancing on a podium at the nightclub, as you do in the 1970s. And someone snaps a photo of them dancing together, and that photo becomes emblematic of the youth quake of the 1970s. So Tracy's question is, was the silver dress and the photograph real? No, both of those are figments of my imagination. Ordinarily in my books, every piece of fashion that I refer to is based on a real gown from whichever time period I'm writing about. And that's the case in The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard. Every other dress or gown is based on a real gown from the period, except the silver dress. I wanted something that would be so iconic and so memorable, and I just couldn't find anything authentic from the period that would serve that purpose. So I made up the silver lame dress. I had super fun kind of coming up with that in my head. If you met me on tour, you would have got one of my postcards, which showed one of my illustrations of the silver dress. So I hope that you've been enjoying those. And I really enjoyed kind of writing that scene where Astrid and Hawk accidentally get caught in this kind of very sexy looking clinch that turns out to become its own story, and a story very different to the moment that actually occurred on stage. As you can see, I'm wearing my sparkly silver earring in honor of the silver lame dress. So a couple more questions in the comments. Thank you. I love getting questions. It makes it so much easier for me to be here chatting to you. So Julia has asked me, did I write Mitz's story based on my research, or did I kind of fictionalize it based on the research that I had done? So great question. Again, thank you, Julia, for asking that. So as I mentioned earlier in this segment, Mitza Bricard, who is the main character in this 1917 to 1947 storyline, was a real woman. In every non-fiction book that's been written about Christian Dior, you'll find a mention of Mitza Bricard because she was also a very iconic figure. And you'll also find a description most likely saying that Mitza was Christian Dior's muse. You'll find a lot of other descriptions of Mitza saying that she liked to wear only fur coats with nothing at all underneath, because of course that's exactly how muses behave, isn't it? She was always draped in jewelry which had been given to her by all the many men she'd slept with. In fact, she was probably a courtesan and probably got paid for her services. And so that was a really kind of interesting story from the point of view of women working alongside men in creative industries and creative pursuits are so often called the muse. But most often, those women also have much creative talent and creative genius of their own. I'm thinking about Dora Maar, who's called Picasso's muse when she was an incredible photographer herself. Camille Claudel, who's always called Rodin's muse when she was an amazing artist herself. Mitza kind of ended up in the same sort of place. And so what I did was I did so much research, more research than I've ever done into anybody in all of my writing history, going back to archives and pulling out birth records and marriage records and you name it. I found it, if it existed, about Mitza. And from those research records, I was able to piece together an alternative story of Mitza Bricard, one that has in fact never been told. It's really exciting for me to be able to do this brand new research that nobody has ever done before and include that in the book. But because it is historical fiction, I did also fictionalize some of Mitza's story because there were simply parts of her life that went on the record. For example, the war, big part of France's history. And interestingly, from my perspective, from having researched many women during wartime, there's so little on the record about so many women. And what we do know about Mitza, or what I do know about Mitza during the war, is that she lived in the same building as the head of the resistance activities for her arrondissement in Paris. She was good friends with Martine de Courcelles, who was married to Charles de Gaulle's right-hand man. She was obviously great friends with Christian Dior, whose sister Catherine was a key member of the French resistance. She had so many connections to resistance and to the resistance networks that it seemed impossible to me that she didn't resist in some way during the war. I just couldn't find any evidence of it, which doesn't mean she didn't. It just means that, like so many women, she never felt the need to write that down, or after the war was so traumatized by whatever happened to her that she couldn't write it down. So I've taken creative license with her wartime years. While she did work for Balenciaga during the war, I've also fictionalized and created another story for Mitza about what she might have gotten up to during the war, just based on pieces of evidence that I found. And I guess I love that part of being a writer, because it's all about filling in the gaps between all the different pieces of evidence that you can find and creating a story that connects all of those dots. And it's a bit like putting a puzzle together in a different way to the way it's intended to be, but a way that still works nonetheless. So I hope that makes sense. Thank you very much for your question, Julia. It was lovely to hear from you. Okay, so a couple more questions here. Sandra has said that she's got the book on her TBR shelf. Hope you enjoyed it if you get a chance to read it. And that she's recently read The Three Lives of Alex St. Pierre, which is my previous book from last year. Just as a side note, if you have read The Three Lives of Alex St. Pierre, you might be interested to know that Alex is a secondary character in The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard. She comes back along with Anthony March, her kind of nemesis / friend from the book. And I know that readers really enjoy when my previous characters make cameo appearances in my new book. So you'll be able to meet Alex again in this book. And Sandra's asked, do I have a background in fashion? It's true that lots of my books do have fashion themes in them. I don't have any official background in fashion. I did work for L'Oreal for a number of years in their marketing department, but that was obviously beauty rather than fashion, although there is obviously a close connection between the two industries. And we certainly did a lot of work with magazine editors in terms of promoting those beauty products. But I call myself an amateur fashion historian. I lived in London for a couple of years during the late 1990s. And I think that was where I really fell into this love of fashion that's endured since then, because I was surrounded by fashion history. I had access to incredible museums like the V&A, which has an astonishing fashion collection, one of the best in the world. The Costume Museum in Bath is also incredible. And so I would go to these museums on my weekends, and I would also wander down the King's Road in Chelsea, where there are a couple of amazing vintage stores, one that was called Steinberg and Tolkien, which no longer exists, sadly. Bricks and mortar vintage stores are few and far between. But her collection of vintage clothing was extraordinary. She had everything from the late 19th century right through to the 1970s. And whereas when you go into a museum, you're always separated from the gowns by a glass vitrine or a glass case. But here in her vintage shop, they were just hanging on the racks and you could reach out and touch them if you so dared. I did not dare because I was a little poor when I was living in London. I was spending all my money on everything. So I didn't want to touch anything and rip it and then have to buy it. Although I would have loved to have been able to afford some of her things back then. So based on that, I started to buy fashion history books and to read them. And I now have quite an extensive fashion history library over on my bookshelves, which is very handy when I'm writing my books because it means that almost anything to do with fashion history, I can find a reference source for or images for. And I don't have to rely on the internet, which can often be unreliable when it comes to dating certain pieces of fashion history. So that's really where it came from. No training at all. So any mistakes you find in the books are all my own, and I apologize for those. I do my best. So thanks for your question, Sandra. Okay, a couple of other questions here. Oh, hello, Jane. Oh no, Jane keeps dropping out thanks to Optus. Yes, I'm lucky. I was not affected by the Optus being down today, but I hope that some of you are able to connect to the live stream tonight, or if not, you'll be able to watch the replay afterwards. Jane's asked whether I plot my books before writing or am I a pantser? So a pantser being someone who flies by the seat of their pants and just makes the story up as it progresses. That is absolutely me. I always say that I'm a really super organized person in every area of my life. I write lists, I like schedules and routine, but when it comes to writing, I don't know what it is, but my organizational side fails me completely and my creativity thrives in chaos. Every time I have ever sat down to try to plan out a book before I begin writing, I have ruined the book and lost the soul of it. So I no longer even bother to try and do that. It means the first draft is really very scary because I don't know the end. For example, I didn't know how this book was going to end. I didn't know whether things were going to end well or end badly, and I won't tell you which path I chose in the end. I just knew I had to start writing, and that's really what I do. Is I begin with a scene, and then hopefully that scene will prompt another scene. And the story unfolds for me page by page in exactly the same way it does for a reader. So it is very scary because I'm always worried that I'm going to get to sort of the end and not know what to do. And it's very true that for most of my books, up until about 7/8 of the way through, I have no idea how it's going to end. And it usually unravels itself in either the first or the second draft. I've had a couple that it's taken me to at least the third draft to find the ending for, but this one, I was fairly set with the ending after that first draft. So it is stressful, but then I had another writer say that they like to write like that because part of what keeps them engaged is trying to work out what happens next in the same way that you are when you're reading a book. And I think that's true for me as well. I enjoy that challenge of sitting down every day and thinking, okay, what's going to happen next on the page? So I find that super fun. Tracy said that she tried to Google Astrid. Yes, I've had so many people say that after the book, even though I've said in the author's note that Astrid was not real and she was a figment of my imagination, that they've still tried to Google her because they were so convinced that she was real. And I love that people felt that she was so real. She was not. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have met Astrid. I think she would have been super fun to go partying with at night. So there was another question that I saw here that I have just lost. And here we go. Kylie has asked me, thank you, Kylie, what inspired me to become a writer? I always wanted to be a writer from the time I was a kid. From the time I could write, I was writing books. If I wasn't writing little books and poems and stories, I was reading stories. We would go to the library every week. We didn't have a lot of money, so we never bought books. We sometimes received books as Christmas gifts, but we didn't just go and buy books from a bookshop. We'd go to the library and I would get out as many books as I was allowed to get on my library card. And I would read those books all week long. If we couldn't get to the library on the weekend, I would go and reread whatever was on my shelf. I had a pretty typical reading childhood for anyone my age because was simply a factor of what books were available at the library. So, of course, I made my way through all of the Enid Blytons and then all of the Nancy Drews, and then I progressed to Sweet Valley High and things like Danielle Steele and these, sweeping epic sagas that I quite loved back then. One of my favorites from childhood was Little Women, and it's still a huge favorite of mine. So from the time I understood that writers wrote books, that was what I wanted to do. It just took me a little while to come around to being a writer. I went and worked in marketing for about 10 or 12 years first, which I think was actually really good because it gave me life experience and I think an emotional range. I think you need all of those things to become a writer. So it's pretty much my dream, and I'm so grateful every day that I get up and I'm living that dream thanks to all of my readers like you. So thank you for letting me live that dream every day. So some more comments here. Oh, Sandra, you love The Paris Secret. Thank you so much. That's another one of my books that came out a couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed writing that too. That one's got a bit of a fashion theme going on as well, but also a storyline about some of the early female pilots, which was both fun to write and enraging to write when I had to do the research into what those women faced, which was some super hard battles. Kylie said that The Babysitter's Club was one of her favorite books growing up. Yes, they were also great, well-loved books. Now, Heather's asked whether I write for a set time each day or whether I write simply when I'm inspired and how I fit in family time. So nowadays, I'm lucky. My kids are old enough. They're all at school. So I write during their school hours, and now they're just all in high school now. So it means I get up to around sort of 3:45 most days to write. And one day a week, my husband comes home from work early and he does the afternoon shift, so I can get at least one full day of writing every week. So I write best when I write every day and I write to a routine. For me, I get inspiration and ideas when I'm away from my desk. When I'm running, I run several times a week, and that's like an active meditation for me. When I'm doing something mindless, like washing the dishes, and my mind is free to kind of daydream and imagine. When I'm in the shower, when I'm driving without 3 kids in the back. And so whenever I get an idea for a scene or for some dialogue or for a character development in one of those moments, I scribble it down in a notebook like this. Got one on my desk right there. Not glamorous, but they do the job. And then my job is, when I have that time during school hours to sit at my desk, is to pick up this notebook, open it up, find that scribbled idea that I have in here, and then turn that into a scene or a paragraph or a chapter or whatever it might happen to be. So that's pretty much how every one of my books unfolds. I work around school terms. It's kind of one draft per term, and then I have a couple of weeks off in the middle to let the draft kind of settle in my mind and have new ideas about it, because I do tend to do quite a lot of rewriting. My first drafts are quick, fast, and messy, and then I spend lots of time trying to get the details right. So I've got another question here from, I'm sorry, I'm probably going to mispronounce this. I think it might be Greta, who has asked, how many books have I written? And she said that she's read 10 and loved them all. I think that means you've read them all then. I'm pretty sure this book is number 10. So you are totally up to date, and that is amazing. Thank you for having read all of them. I love that. I will have a new book coming out that I've just submitted to my publisher. That will be publication date TBA. Unfortunately, I don't have that in my schedule. I don't know what the publication date for that is at the moment, but that will be something to look forward to in the future. So have I missed any questions? I hope that I haven't. It's been lovely chatting to you all. Let me just make sure that I haven't missed something. I feel like there was one back here that I did not get to. Nicole said she loves my bling. Thank you. I love my bling too. Christina asked what inspired me to become a writer, which I think someone else asked and I have answered. So I feel like I have answered all of the questions. We're starting to run out of time. We've got 1 minute to go, or a couple of minutes. So if you do have any other questions, please ask. Don't let me leave without answering any burning questions you might have. Just very quickly before we leave, another really fun thing that the book covers is the fashion battle of Versailles, which happened in 1973. And it was this amazing battle for fashion supremacy between 5 French couturiers and 5 American designers. in the theatre at the Palace of Versailles in France. And as soon as I stumbled across an article about that, I knew I had to write that story, because what an amazing backdrop. These gowns being paraded at the Palace of Versailles by the best designers in the world. So there's a lot of really fun history behind the Battle of Versailles. If you go to my Substack blog, you'll be able to find a couple of articles that I've written about that if you want to know more about that. But otherwise, thank you so much. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Carly. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Carolyn. It's been lovely to have shared this last half hour with you. I hope that you've enjoyed hearing me talk about the book. I hope that if you do read The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard, you enjoy the book. You can always find me on Facebook and Instagram and drop me a message and let me know how you enjoyed it. If you've got any questions about the book, I'd love to answer those for you. So just get in touch. Take care, everyone, and have an amazing night. Bye.